Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today. It's August 21st, 2019, and my name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore. This is my weekly series of these chats that I do talking about MuseScore music and whatever is interesting me or that people have suggested for me to talk about. So last week I had intended to talk about this composition Coming Back Home that you see on the screen right now, and I had internet problems last week, and hopefully I don't this week, as I am actually in the same location, which is part of why this is my topic for the week. But we'll see. It seems to have been behaving better today. So let me catch up, because I didn't get very far talking last week before the connection just died. So let me just tell you a little bit about why I want to talk about this, and then I'll play you the piece and then talk some about it. This piece, Coming Back Home, I had talked about in a previous cafe, because I used it as an example for posting. Come on, click. There we go. That's the score. So I had used it as an example for how we could get some chord symbol playback, and I created this chord symbol cheat sheet, and if you go click on that link I just posted, you'll come to the score, and then from there you can get a link to the cheat sheet, where basically I have these pre-composed voicings for all these chords, and all I did was copy and paste them from my cheat sheet into MuseScore, and then made those staves invisible so that I could hear the playback but not see it. And that's more effective if I turn the volume up. That seems to be the good. So I'm not going to play the whole thing this time. I think I did last time, and that was probably a mistake, because then that's when the internet decided to die shortly after. I'll play the whole piece on the piano this time, I think, because that's part of my story. The piece itself here has these chord symbol playback going on the version that you can get to on MuseScore.com, and there's also coming in a hopefully soon future update, the ability to play back chord symbols just built into the program. I showed that in another cafe a month or two ago that a student, Peter, is working on through Google Summer of Code, and it's great work. It's just about done. So yeah, I'm not here to talk about the mechanics of how I get these chord symbols to play back. You can watch the previous cafes and learn more about that. I want to talk about the chords themselves, the melody themselves, the piece, and then a little bit about the process that led me to being able to write this piece. Because the claim I made last week is this piece takes all of about a minute and a half to play, and I claim that I probably wrote it in about a minute and 40 seconds, which sounds like a ridiculous exaggeration, and maybe it's a slight one, but really only slight. I mean, it really almost wrote itself. And in other words, I just sat down at the piano, was just messing around, and then this first little snippet of melody came out, this little bit that we're about to hear. I think I wrote that much, and I mean, I didn't even write. I wasn't trying to write. I was just playing. I was just practicing, just doing whatever. That's what I do. And decided, hey, this might be a piece. It sounded a little familiar to me, that bit, and since then, there's like this pop song. I want to say it's Peebo Bryson. I should really look this stuff up, but if ever this time, if ever you're in my arms again. So it's a similar little melodic phrase to that. Luckily, I didn't know what it was, or I might have stopped right there. I just knew it sounded a little familiar and was catchy. So, I mean, my song was very different from that one, but that bit of melody is similar. And then I just kept playing, and I was like, okay, well, I know what I can do once I reach that F chord, and I knew I could turn it around this way, and this is some of the stuff I want to talk about. And then I repeated the phrase a little differently, and this time I was like, oh, well, let me go somewhere different, and I knew things that I could do different, and things just came out of my fingers. almost like magic. But it's not magic. It's a question of knowing certain things about harmony, certain things about how chords fit together. Um, so I know I only put the word out a few minutes before I started because I wasn't 100% confident I was going to be able to do this at all today. And so there's not as many people who will be watching live today, and so I probably won't get much in the way of questions. But by all means, I am monitoring on the phone the chat, so if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to interject. I also had the time zone wrong, and because I thought when I told YouTube that it was going to be 12:30 my time, where I'm at now in Florida, that it would understand that, but no, it thought I meant 10:30, 12:30 where I usually live, which is Colorado, which are two different time zones. So anyhow, more confusion. So that's another bit of the story that I want to talk a little bit about today, that I am back in Florida. I'm helping my parents move out of the house where we grew up. And so if you see here, this is now a big empty house, right? But there's still the piano. So I'll get to this. Is the piano that I learned music on. Well, I initially learned it on a different one, but then, we got this one once it became obvious that I and my siblings were serious about it. So yeah, I want to talk about the process of learning music and how I went about it and how different ways of going about learning music. My wife is a music teacher, and she's just starting school this week, and that's an important part. And I'm a music teacher, for that matter. I'll be starting next week teaching a music theory course. But yeah, there's a lot of aspects to learning about music, and in particular, learning in a way that allows you to compose, which isn't necessarily the focus of most music teaching. So lots of little random topics to talk about, and I'm just going to keep talking about them until I get tired of it. All right, so the first thing I want to do then is I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to play this song for you. I'm going to play it on the piano, and I'm not going to claim that when I first played it and it came out of my fingers exactly how I'm playing it, because I've played it a few times now, and more than a few, and kind of have a good sense of it, but it did come out fairly fully formed. So I'm going to put this down over here, and if I do this right, let's see. If I go to full screen, no, that's not what I want. I want headshot only. Can you see the piano? No, not really. No, you can. All right. So if I move it further back, does that help? A little? Okay. So I'm going to play the song, Coming Back Home. Oh, it's one of the reasons I picked this song, well, because I am coming back home. I'm back in Florida helping my parents move out of the house we grew up in, but also this song is on the front page. If you go to musescore.org, you will see this song in the screenshot of MuseScore that shows. So a lot of people have seen the song because of that, and I've gotten a lot of comments about it over however long it's been up, months or something like that. So anyhow, without further ado, here's Coming Back Home. Yay, thanks. Thank you. Okay, so bring the piano back. I might. So the deal is, it's a smaller Yamaha Grand, and it is monetarily speaking, not worth as much as it would cost to move it. But of course, life isn't just about money, right? So we may well make that happen. It's also a question of making sure we can find room for it and things like that. So anyhow, that's the piece, and it's normally done as a jazz piece, meaning I would play that melody, then there'd be some improvisation, because I was playing the melody pretty well as written, if you were following along or able to follow along. If you had clicked the link, because I wasn't on screen anymore. Let me go back to where the lead sheet is. Here we go. I was playing the melody pretty much as written and playing the chords as written, but of course those are just chord symbols. The whole skill involved in turning those chord symbols into real life accompaniment. I didn't learn those skills from any one particular source. I mean, I took piano lessons, and my piano teacher, when I first started learning, and this was when I was living in Connecticut, was a music theory and composition professor at the Hart School in Hartford, Elizabeth Scheidel, and it's now Elizabeth Austin. And she did teach us theory, and I had 2 lessons a week. I had a piano lesson myself, and then a theory lesson that was with some other students of about the same age group. And so we would have 2 lessons a week, a private piano lesson and then like a group theory lesson. So I learned about chords, but not how to play chord symbols in a jazz style. It was more just knowing what the chords were and some theory about how they fit together, but not specifically about playing them in a jazz style. And then I did take a few lessons in high school from a jazz piano teacher, John Cimino, who taught me a few things. And I learned a lot, though, just from reading music. There was a lot of music published for like the high school jazz band. It was like, arrangements by Sammy Nestico, for instance, or Frank Mantooth, I remember, used to have piano voicings for all the chord symbols written out. So I would see a chord symbol, and then I would see notes telling me this is how to play that chord, or how we want you to play that chord right here. And I think I understood. It wasn't like, oh, this is the only way to play a G7 or whatever. It was a way, but it was better than any way I knew. So I learned just from reading how Sammy Nestico or Frank Mantooth or a few others wrote out their accompaniment in these big band charts. So that is a lot of how I learned things. And then, I took some other lessons. When I was in California for a year, I studied with Susan Muscarella, a great teacher out there, who now runs a program called the Jazz School, which is a fantastic program from everything I've heard about it, but that wasn't around while I was there. But anyhow, so she taught me a lot about jazz playing, and I've taken a few lessons from miscellaneous other people, Art Landy in Colorado, Eric Gunnison, and Dave Hansen, both of whom teach at University of Denver, where I got my master's degree in music. My undergraduate wasn't in music, it was in math, and then also computer science as a double major. So that's where my programming skills that I've applied to MuseScore came from. So anyhow, I learned from all these people, but it's not like any one person ever sat down and said, this is how you create accompaniment from chord symbols. It's just picking up little bits and things from lots of different places. And the same is true about learning to compose music in this style. I mean, I've played so many songs that are in this style. Last time I made a point of mentioning, this time I mentioned this. I mentioned if ever, or in my arms again, this time, something like that. I don't know. So it is a little bit of the same melody. But this part, come on, y'all know, if you pay any attention to what's happening here, starting with the D minor chord here. That, not on purpose, but come on, I stole that. Yuletide carols being sung, right? That's the bit of that song. So the chords from here to here, and realistically, not the exact melody, but some of the notes in the melody are basically taken from El Torme's The Christmas Song. So lots of bits of melodies are in any song are going to be reminiscent of another, because there's really only so many ways to put a measure of music together and have it make sense. So that's always going to be the case. But also, this is true of chords. This little chord progression here in the key of F, 2 to 5 to 1, that's like the basic building block of most jazz and most of the songs in this kind of a genre. This little bit here, then I want to get back to two chords. So I have 1, 4, 3, 6. That also is that's just a thing. I mean, that is how you get back from one. Songs basically in this style spend a whole lot of their time trying to figure out ways of getting from 2 to 1 and then back to 2 and back to 1 and just going back and forth between 2 and 1. Sometimes you land on 1 and then you spin around for a bit, come back to 1 again. Sometimes you're on 2, spin around for a bit, come back to 2. Sometimes instead of landing on 1, we land on 3 or 6, which have the same notes. Like here's the 1 chord, F, A, C, E. If I leave out the F, so let me just get a blank thing here. In the key of F, let me undo all this stuff here. I had been experimenting with something here. All right, fine. I won't worry about it. But if you take an F major 7 chord, and then maybe take it down an octave, you have an F major 7 chord. If I take away the root, now I've got an A minor chord. So the 1 chord and the 3 chord in any key are very much interchangeable, and there's a whole theory of which chords substitute based on things like that, what notes they have in common, which resolution tendency notes, like within a scale degree 3 and scale degree 4 are only a half step apart, and then scale degree 7 and scale degree 1 are only a half step apart, and there's some very specific relationships that happen. Chords that have one of those notes tend to like to resolve to chords that have the other one of those notes. That's not to put, yeah, that's not a bad little summary of how that works. Anyhow, there's all sorts of theory to kind of delve into about how that works, and I'm not planning here to get all into all the details, but I want to give you an appreciation for the bigger picture here. So the bigger picture is recognizing that these patterns exist, and that this pattern here of 2-5-1 is really just borrowed from a million other songs. This pattern here, 1-4-3-6, as a way of getting back to 2, is taken from a million other songs. This pattern here of a 2-5 that doesn't resolve to 1, but instead starts a 2 to 5 to 1 in the key of B flat. It kind of has a little modulation to B flat, the key of the 4. That also is in a million songs. This use of this chord here, which a jazz musician would call a tritone substitution, a classical musician, if they had to analyze this, once I wrote it all out in the voicings, they would recognize this as a French 6th chord. But it's all the same sounds. All the little bits. So this little modulation that happens here from B flat to down to D minor, that's super common. That's going from basically 1 to 3 if we think of B flat as the main key, or it's going from 4 to 6 if we remember F is the overall key. But either way, that's a very common modulation, and again we get to the D minor with 2-5-1. Then we have 2-5-1 to A major. That's the only thing in this entire piece up to this point that was at all unusual. Where did A major come from? The song was an F, then it visited B flat. Where does A come from? I don't know, it sounded good. I like this little descending bass line. D, there it is, D, C, B. I love those kind of descending bass lines that go like that. You'll see I use another one right here. C, B flat, A, and then that starts at 2-5 also. So all these little motions are familiar motions to me, but this second modulation from B flat going to the key of the 4 is common, going to the key of 3 is common. From 4 to the 3 after that, I don't know, maybe not as common, but it happens in the Christmas song. Then going down another half step to A flat. All right, now we're only talking Christmas song. It's probably the only other song that has that exact sequence from D minor to A major to A flat, or, the same thing in another key. So the specific thing when you put three of these pieces together, modulation to D minor, modulation to A, neither of those modulations on their own are uncommon. Put them back to back, and maybe there's only 50 songs that do it. But then put the modulation to D minor and the one to A and the one to A flat. Or if I should talk about it relative to the key, in the key of F, this was going to sixth, and then to major 3, and then to major flat 3. That specific combination, there's probably only one other song that does that. Maybe someone else stole from it too, and so there's two others. But that's a unique thing. But then it goes right back to same old, same old, same old. Every last little bit of what happens here happens in a million other songs, which is why it can just come out of me, because I've played progressions just like these 1,000 times. So part of the process of composing music is being so familiar with other music in the style that you're trying to compose in, that music in that style just comes out of you without really having to think that hard about it. I mean, yeah, sometimes you stuff might come out of your head that you've never heard before, never thought of before. Maybe it actually sounds good. A common thing that happens, though, in my experience, is people will write something that any number of times, I see there's a comment, I'll get to that in a second. People will write something, and I can tell from what they've written that they actually in their heads were hearing something else, like they were hearing that little snippet of the Christmas song, or that if ever you're in my arms again, or whatever. But they heard it in their head, but it didn't quite come out right because they didn't understand those sounds they were hearing. So they approximated it in what they play on the piano or what they wrote down. And it's the fact that they're not familiar enough with the language that caused them to get the details wrong. Kind of like how you misheard song lyrics, if you think about that. Like any number of songs that you might hear and like, what is that lyric anyhow? And you think they're singing something other than what it really is, and then eventually you find out what it really is, and you go, oh, that's what he was saying all that time, right? We've all had that experience. So a little off topic, yes. So are the chord symbols in the jazz template? Oh, these chord symbols. So this is all in just the regular jazz template. Now you can type chord symbols any way you want. You don't have to use MA7 for major. That's just how I do it, because it's how most major publishers do it these days, MA and MI. But the fact that it's coming out in the jazz font, and it's coming up with the superscripted numbers and the double superscripted adjustments. That's all part of the jazz template. If you saw the Café I did maybe 2-3 weeks ago, you'll see that this is now going to be something you'll be able to do even without using the jazz template or without using the jazz style of chord symbols. It'll be possible just to take ordinary chord symbols in a future release of MuseScore and just say how much you want these numbers superscripted, and then you'll give another number of how much you want these numbers superscripted. You get to specify both the amount of superscripting, how high it is, and how much smaller it gets. So there'll be style settings for that. So anyhow, those the appearance of these chord symbols, I could type whatever I wanted in here. Let me just type a different one. If I liked triangles, I can use the caret to be that, and I could have a triangle 7. Caret is triangle. So if I like triangles better, I can have them, or if I like MAJ or capital M, whatever. The same things work even without using a jazz template. So I can come here and also type a triangle 7 and get a triangle 7 just in regular font. So, I always am happy to answer MuseScore related questions on any topic, or, not even MuseScore related, music related, whatever. Cooking, ask me about cooking. I'll tell you about that too. I'll tell you what I know. I improvise. That's all stuff that the more familiar you are, I need more water, with the language that you're trying to write in, the more naturally you can speak in that language. I get sometimes people try to, they have this fear, I don't know if it's a fear exactly, but they'll express a thought along the lines of, I don't want to learn how other people wrote music, I want to write my own music. That's all well and good, but the reality is what ends up coming out of you is going to be a function of what you hear. no one writes music that's unlike anything they've ever heard. Even the craziest music you ever heard was written by people who listen to music only slightly less crazy. I mean, that's a general truism. So you write stuff that sounds kind of like what you've heard, and then you have your own spin on it that takes it a little further, hopefully. So yeah, a lot of people have a resistance to learning too much about the language of the music that they're trying to write because they don't want to just repeat it. And I understand that, but that's not what you're going to do. You're not going to just repeat it. You're going to take that and build on it and be understandable. You're going to create music that's understandable in that language, that sounds really like it's in that language, as opposed to this thing that I mentioned I sometimes get from students, which is music that obviously kind of sounds like this other thing, but they missed it. Like they didn't realize that this was supposed to have been a C7, and they didn't know about black keys, and so they played that as a C major 7 and then wondered why it sounded a little wrong. That kind of thing. Like just really the wrong note for this thing. And that happens sometimes when people write kind of by trial and error. The first thing that comes out of your fingers that's kind of close, you're like, well, I guess that's it. And then once you've played it, your memory of what you were actually trying for is gone, because now you've heard what you actually did. And you can't get back the sound that you originally had in your head, which probably was the C7, because that's what you're used to hearing, whether you knew the name of it or not, whether you knew the notes in it or not. The sound that you've heard all your life has been the sound of G minor 7 to C7 to F major. And it's not the only sound you've ever heard in your life, but it is a sound every single person watching this has heard many, many times. So it's once you play something a little bit wrong, you will then start to accept it as correct, and it then becomes almost impossible to actually get back to where you started, what the thought was you had. So I don't know, I mentioned all these different aspects of things that I've wanted to talk about today, and I've kind of hit on all of them to some extent. I didn't really have a specific agenda other than wanting to introduce all these topics. I did want to talk a little bit about like more of the process of learning. I mentioned that I took these lessons from all these different people. Sometimes with like Liz Scheidel, I studied with her for like 5 years, but like from age 6 to age 10 kind of a thing. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah. And then Cindy Kessler down here in Florida, I studied with for also probably 6 more years. And she also taught theory in composition, and I did some theory in composition there in a kind of a classical vein also. And I wrote some jazz pieces more by writing what I thought I was hearing, but it wasn't just what I was hearing because I was playing in the high school jazz band, so I got to see the written music and really got to play things that were, or write things that were fairly similar to the kind of stuff that I was playing there. But anyhow, that was like a lifelong process of accidents, really. I mean, it's an accident that the person who lived 2 houses away from me happened to be a composition professor at a prestigious music school. I mean, what are the odds of that, right? That just happened to be the case. And so I got to study with a composition professor from age 6. I mean, that's like crazy. That doesn't happen normally, but it just happened that she was our neighbor. And then all the people that I studied with over the years, were people I encountered for whatever reason. And but I didn't have like this plan that says, oh, I know I should study classical piano first, and then I should study theory, and then I should switch teachers, and then I should start taking up a band instrument because I'm going to learn new things from that. No, this wasn't a plan because I played clarinet in high school band. There was no plan to this, and so it took me decades to learn all this. It's interesting to me now to consider, what if someone wanted now to say, my goal wasn't to learn to do this. My goal wasn't to learn how to write coming back home, right? My goal was to do what my mother says and take some piano lessons and get to go out and play after I finished practicing or whatever. That was my only goal. At some point I realized I liked the piano lessons and I didn't have to be bribed into practicing. But I didn't have an end goal in sight. So now it's more possible. And like people who major in music, which I didn't do, might have this end goal, like, oh, I'm going to be a professional musician. I didn't think I was going to be a professional musician in high school or in college. That just sort of happened later. But it did turn out that the fact that I did do computer career for a while, working for Hewlett Packard, enabled me to, set myself up financially where I could afford to then be a musician. It's not like I made so much that I could retire and not work, but I got my foot in the door of the housing market, that kind of thing. So a lot of things make a lot of sense in hindsight. So now I'm babbling, but this is coming back home. This is the whole thing. Right now, I can look back over my life, over my last 50 years of being around a piano, and look at it in terms of, wow, this is all the things that have happened in my life that have brought me to the point of being able to just sit down at a piano and write a piece like this. So now I'm like also faced with the thought of, well, what if someone doesn't have 50 years to spend meandering about and hoping to stumble on this? They just want to learn to do this. So how does one just learn to do it? Well, you're going to learn the same skills, but maybe in a different order than I learned them in, or with a different focus to it. So I think you're saying it's good for us to write songs even though you don't want to. Yes, you should write songs. And I heard one of yours and it was great. And I'm looking forward to us playing your arrangement of the other piece. So yeah, I mean, it's the process of learning to do this is one that I want to be helping people with. And so I've mentioned a few times that I'm in the process of developing an online course to teach about theory and composition. And so I'm really like thinking a lot about these issues of how one best learns this language, not necessarily specifically this language. I mean, maybe you would rather, last week or a couple weeks ago, the demo piece was, right? That learning to write in that style or whatever other style. I mean, it's all the same language of music, just different dialects of it, really. And so I want to be showing people what's involved in writing in this language by really giving them an understanding of the language. So this is now something that I'm going to be doing. And as it turns out, I just found out a few weeks ago that I'm going to be actually teaching a theory course in Denver this fall. I've taught theory courses before, but I hadn't for a while. I've just taught privately the last few years, but now I'm going to be teaching another course, a different one than I've taught before. And so I'm going to be teaching that course and using that kind of as a springboard to develop my online course as well. So anyhow, you'll be hearing more from me specifically about individual little aspects of theory rather than me just going on and on about all sorts of stuff like I kind of did today. So I feel like I've just been talking and talking and talking, which is what I do, but maybe a little more scattered than sometimes. So there's a few of you watching here. I always get a misleading count because right now it says that I'm the only one watching, but obviously there's people commenting. So so I don't really know how many people are watching live. But are there any other questions, comments, or whatever about this piece, about MuseScore, about chord symbols, about composition, whatever? Because I'm always happy to just leave people with something they actually are wanting to hear rather than just stuff that I want to talk about. Next week, I can tell you I'll be back in Colorado. So I'm in Florida right now, as I mentioned, helping my parents move, and they downsized from this big old house to a much more manageable independent living apartment situation. And so, yeah, maybe this piano finds its way back to Colorado if we can make that happen. But next week, I will have started my theory class. And in that theory class, you remember 2 weeks ago, I had my student, Elizabeth, the blind student. Well, I guess I had just found out that day, the day before that I would be teaching this course. So Elizabeth will be in that class, and so I'll be working with her, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about some accessibility issues over the course of the semester as we figure some things out, maybe more about the process of dealing with music as a blind musician more so than the mechanics of using MuseScore. So do I start with a melody or a chord progression? So the answer is either. Typically, because I'm a pianist, typically I do both. I'll sit down and I will play the melody and the chords together as I'm writing. But I can be a little more specific than that. Like, there will be times when I might do something like the following. I might have had and like, what comes next? I know that's the melody note, but I don't know what chord yet. And then I have to ask myself, ooh, I know I hear something crunchy here. And before, I don't want to play anything yet. I don't want to do this trial and error because I'm going to lose the thought in my head. So I need to narrow things down a little bit. This note I'm hearing in my head is a note that kind of is crunchy, by which I mean it's not in the chord exactly, it's a color tone. It's a sharp 9, a flat 9, a sharp 5, or a flat 5. Well, it's one of those four. If I say it's crunchy, I probably mean one of those four. So I could just figure out, well, what chord is the sharp 9 of, what chord is it the flat 9 of, what, and so forth, and figure it out that way. Or I could also think a little more in terms of what it's going to imply as to what way I'm modulating. Do I hear it modulating to a sharper key or a flatter key? If I treat this, if I think this is a flat 9, it's a flat 9 on a B7 chord, which would take me to E. That would have been a possible chord, but I knew that wasn't it. I don't know how I knew, I just knew. I think when I did it, I just hit it. I might have hit that right away. I think that's what I really hit though, I think. And then I tried, no, it doesn't go there. I think it's just, I think I realized, okay, it's all about that A7. And then later on, I expanded that to, instead of a simple measure of that, to, I use the circle of fifths to expand on it. So what happens is often I write a little bit of melody, I write one more note of melody and have a chord with that melody. So I have a melody and chord for one measure. I write the next note of melody, maybe the next two notes of melody, and then I find the chord that fits them, and then I finish the melody on that measure, and then I write the next note that fits the next chord, find the chord that fits it, and then some else. So it's kind of a one measure at a time process for me often. So when I said that this song took me only a little longer than the minute and a half that it takes to play, it's because of this little passage here, from here to there with all the modulations. That's the part that I had to sit down and think about a little more. Everything else just sort of came out. The first draft was pretty much it. That was the part that I had to start and stop a couple times and maybe go back to before I was happy with it. But even that didn't take long. So my usual process of writing is that sort of together melody and chords. But I will say, as a jazz musician, and certainly you know this, Colleen, we do an awful lot of improvisation where you're given a chord progression and then you write a melody to it. So yeah, that's a thing too. And I've written any number of melodies to fit existing chord progressions where I actually approach that as a composition, but just as a jazz improvisation, I've done, millions of those over my life. So that's a thing, but I don't typically approach composition that way, only when I decide, I should write a blues tune, because I don't write that many blues tunes. I'm just going to write one. So I'll start with a blues chord progression. But I do start with a melody and then put chords to it, or don't put chords to it, because I write a fair amount of music that's, I don't like to use the word atonal because it has all sorts of connotations that aren't necessarily what I mean by this, but I will just say non-tonal. That's what term I'm more happy with. There might be harmonies implied by the melody, but they're not specifically about a chord progression that I'm then going to improvise over. That's maybe the best way I can explain it. So I'll have a melodic line, I'll have ways of harmonizing that line, but maybe I put names on those chords, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just write out the notes for everyone, or I just play it on the piano. Like, there's a piece I wrote all this note for note. I didn't symbols on that when I wrote it. I just wrote through compose, like classical piano music. But it was informed, obviously, by my jazz knowledge, and I can then go back now and look at it and sort of decipher what chord symbols might have gone with it if I ever wanted to put any to it. So that's kind of my answer to that. Any of these approaches are valid. Melody first, then chords, chords first, then melody. But what I tend to gravitate towards is more a measure at a time. Chord then melody that quick. Melody then chord for each measure. That's my best answer. But anything's valid. Whatever works for you works. Okay. So I think with all of that said, on a bunch of different topics and me just talking about background, playing through the piece, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the things that, go write a song. I can't wait to hear it. I'm going to leave it at that. So next week I will be back in Colorado, and I'll be coming to you probably from Regis, and I'll probably talk about something relating to school. I don't have my topic yet, but something relating to education probably, because that's where my head's going to be now for a little bit. But also chord symbol stuff is also on my mind because of the Google Summer of Code student that I'm working with who's implementing chord symbol playback, and that I've now implemented this Roman numeral analysis stuff and other things. So there's things relating to chords, and Nashville notation, which I think I mentioned. So yeah, chord symbols have been on my mind, theory's been on my mind, and accessibility has been on my mind. So I will probably have things relating to those topics that I continue to talk about over coming weeks. But by all means, send me suggestions. So yeah, I'll bring the piano if I can. All right. So I will sign off now and talk at you next week. Bye.